Page 1 of Action Geometry. This is the lore of how to duplicate it. And here it is. I pull the page out. There's page 1. It's just the tools of what's going to be used to make the rest of the book. And here they are. The compass, the straight edge, the crayons, the pen, and the tape, and the box cutter, which we're going to need to get the cardboard that makes the physical basis of the thing. So I take a piece of paper, it's 8.5 by 11. I mark it off by 8.5 inches and then draw a line. So I'm making an 8.5 inch by 8.5 inch square. And then I cut it out. If you're in the part of the world that uses A4 instead of 8.5 by 11, just make it a square using those dimensions. I cut that out and there's my square. I'm going to draw on here. So now I trace the compass. This is really just a cartoon, you know, so I'm tracing it loosely. You could draw it. If you're doing it electronically, digitally, whatever, you would take a photograph and then integrate the photograph. In this case, I'm just tracing it. And again, this is really just a cartoon, so it's going to be a little rough, or not. If you want to be very, very careful about it and make it beautiful, that's fine too. I draw a point and then I draw a circle. This is where you learn how to draw a circle in whatever your tool is. I'm using a compass. And this is where, if you're doing it with somebody who's teaching you, they're going to show you how to do the compass-based circles and then ink them in. If you're doing it on a computer, this is where you learn to use that command, which is just hitting a key, probably. And then I ink it in. It goes off the page, but I don't care, because it's really just a conceptual cartoon. Then I label my circle, just like I labeled my point. Now I'm going to draw what's called a Vesica Piscis, where I draw a circle, mark its center, mark a point on the edge, and then draw another circle centered on the first circle with the same radius. This is again called a Vesica Piscis, Pisces like fish. This comes up over and over and over again in geometry. It's incredibly useful and also central to a lot of different design systems. You see it in architecture, especially religious architecture and religious symbolism. And it's also the basis of a lot of the classical geometric constructions from Euclid that I'm going to be using later in this book. Then I label it Vesica Piscis. You can see the spelling. And finish inking it in. This inking process is a great spot to split this up into multiple people. So you have a pencil user and a pen user, and one person inks while somebody else draws the actual circle. Can make it more fun to do with a group of people and also more efficient, and lets people kind of break up the different tasks that they're learning. So there I finish inking it. Now I get my crayons out and I start doing color-coded coloring for the different things. I do a light pink for point and get out my yellow to make the circle like the sun. Doesn't really matter. I mean, this is really just like a coloring book. You're going to kind of choose it a bit arbitrarily. In fact, that's a great way to do this project, is that you make it without any colors and then pass this off to somebody who uses it like a coloring book, and then they can pass it off to somebody else who laminates it, or back to the first person or whatever. Yeah, I like to color the metal in a kind of metal-y color, gray, silver, whatever like that. I color the wood ruler in with brown, but you can't see that because of my camera angle. Now I begin the either fun or tedious, depending on your perspective, task of coloring in the Vesica Piscis. I like to do this to indicate the kind of what's going on here, that there's two things that are intersecting, by using red and blue for the two circles and then purple for their intersection, because red and blue make purple. That's what would actually happen physically if you had a red piece of glass or clear plastic and a blue piece of glass or clear plastic. And that's kind of the idea of this entire project. Action geometry is about real things in the real world. Things have color, they have texture, they have size. This is not the world of Euclid. This is the world of physical things. Wax, ink, paper, cardboard, that sort of thing. And I continue the coloring process with blue. Nothing special about crayons. You could use colored pencils, paint, pastels, markers, whatever you want. Finishing the coloring, and there we go. Okay. I like to color in the words as well, to kind of correlate the words with their concepts. Now I'm drawing a trace of that piece of paper onto my double thick corrugated cardboard, which I cut out of a moving box, hence double thick. It doesn't have to be super thick. It doesn't even have to be corrugated, but I really recommend it. That's the thing, if you want to copy this, that's what it should be, is thick corrugated cardboard, because that's very strong, very rugged. So it should be 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches. I'm just double checking that is pretty close. Now I get out my box cutter and be very careful not to cut myself by cutting towards any of the various parts of my fingers and toes or whatnot. And I cut down, you can see it accidentally creased. That's probably because I pushed pretty hard with the pen, which is fine. It made it crease on exactly the right spot. I cut it out. I only need 2 cuts because I did it up against the corner here. And there is the square that will be the page. Once I put paper on it, laminate it, I compare it to the existing one. 1/2 inch in, 1/2 inch in. That's where all these holes are. And I do 3 holes. So there's a pair on the top and a pair on the side so that I can make it into a book. But I always have 2 across the top so I can hang it like a piece of art also. So that if this is going to be used as a reference, I can dangle it from any of a variety of different superstructures to have it hanging above me while I do this. And I kind of draw this in. I do this pretty freehand. Just make sure it's about a 1/2 inch in, and I kind of make something that's a right angle on the corner and then has a diagonal coming out there. So it's maybe another 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, square root of 2 times 1/2 inch for that hypotenuse if you want to be real precise about it, which you don't. Now I get out the box cutter and I cut out those shapes. And again, I want to be careful that I'm not stabbing myself or destroying some sort of surface, destroying a carpet, destroying a countertop. There's lots of ways to do damage with a box cutter. So this is a good spot to be very careful. You could also use an X-Acto knife or a razor blade. But I don't think you just want to use a regular knife. That's going to be frustrating. Part of what's nice about box cutters is that each piece of the blade is pretty disposable, so you just whip through them. I don't know of a good way to sharpen it. I suppose you could sharpen it, but I just snap them off. They're pretty cheap, and each one comes with quite a few blades. So I finished this process, cutting, going back and forth between the 2 sides. I prefer to do a lot of fairly gentle cuts to some sort of severe attempting to stab all the way through in the beginning because, well, it decreases the chances of all sorts of accidents, both the ones that damage the workpiece and the ones that cause injury. Here I'm cutting towards my fingers, which is a terrible idea. Don't do that. Don't cut towards your fingers. Seriously, don't do that. It's not a good idea. All right, so now I've got my 3 holes. Now I put my piece of paper on there, kind of line it up, make sure it's about the right size. If it's not, I'm going to cut some off. Get out my tape. There's a lot of different kinds of packing tape you can use for this. I find that the brand that you choose does matter. I've been using the Duck brand, like Duck Tape, D-U-C-K. I'm sure really any brand would be fine. I hate to just advocate for a brand, but the thing that drives me crazy about some of the generic brand tapes is that once it gets disconnected from the thing that holds it in place, so it's just like connected onto itself, it's darn near impossible to get off. So I laminate it by putting a whole bunch of pieces of tape on here, but now I have to cut out the paper. And if I lie on my back and stare up at the light, I can see the light shining through the paper. So that's why I'm at this funny angle here. So I'm not going to show all this. I've edited it by about 50%, but there's this process where I fairly carefully do that. Okay, that's it. It's done. Done, 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 done.